Do I have to sit down? I'll get very nervous if I sit down. So if you allow me to stand up, I'd appreciate that. And it's a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank the sponsors for inviting me. I've always enjoyed coming to Thailand, not only for the food, but also for the beer, and also the company. I've got a number of very close friends. So it's difficult for me to follow from Michael Reid. You must appreciate that Michael Reid is a New Zealander and I'm an Australian, and we normally don't agree on most things. So Michael yesterday gave you an overview of what we were looking at, potential technologies which could impact post-harvest in the future. What I want to do today is actually go and look at post-harvest and see what we're really not addressing even now. So let's go. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to present a wholesome, safe and diverse supply of fruits and vegetables. Most of these are vegetables, but anyway, that's the objective of what we're trying to do. However, we still have losses in the system. The losses of quantity are normally what we measure, and these losses ranging depend on the commodity from 10 to 80%. And that 80% is a little bit of a strange value for me because it affects when you look at a product loss over a particular period where it may have been wet or something may have happened. And so you'll get these spurious high losses. It's often our major focus of looking at loss, but actually quality loss, which Dr. Cater was pushing many years ago and still before he died last year, is an afterthought. And the loss of quality is a major factor in post-harvest. We develop and grow the crop and we reach a certain quality. It's that quality which in post-harvest we try to maintain and enhance if we can. Normally that's not very possible. We can ripen fruit, but we're not really improving quality from what we had when we produced it. The loss in quality occurs many places in the post-harvest chain, and I want to focus on that issue of quantity and quality loss. Now, food safety is another issue, and I'll talk about that at the end, but food safety in the US has become an increasingly important aspect of post-harvest. And that's why you'll see in many papers from Europe and from the US, Australia, and other countries, this problem of food safety, and we'll talk about that. Anyway, our consumers of most of our product in developing countries are changing. Most of them are aging. In Japan, many of the population is in their 60s and 70s, and that will increase dramatically in the next few years. And the other thing about it is the consumers have become extremely health conscious, and I would imagine that even in Thailand, there is a component of the population who are very concerned with food safety and are very health conscious. Much of this health consciousness and the relationship to fruits and vegetables is associated with fear. Many people have said, oh, if you do this, you know, it won't be safe for you. Genetic engineering, I think Dr. Reid didn't want to talk about yesterday, but that's one that I think is a future for us and is a matter of a lot of fear. There is a demand by the consumers. Your supermarkets in Thailand are following the example of supermarkets around the world. What do they want? They want consistency in supply and they want consistency of high quality. They are the two things they want. Price is a second aspect. But consistency in supply, can you give me a container load of product tomorrow or next week, and can you have it at this quality, which we have decided upon. Freshness, ripeness, and the other taste and flavor. Our problem really is in connecting the farmer to the markets. In many cases we have significant problems with small farmers. Small farmers have problems accessing supermarkets. Supermarkets are becoming more and more important in all developing countries. So there is a matter in farming associated with economic development. But who controls access? And this is a big problem that we have to address. Who controls access for small farmers? Many of our fruits and vegetable farmers in developing countries and also in Hawaii and some other places are small. And they can't necessarily directly connect to the large sources of retailers. Traditional markets are very good. Actually, I like traditional markets in many cases, particularly for small growers. You're looking at a product which normally from harvest to the consumer is about 48 hours. It doesn't require a lot of resources, and it requires essentially minimum infrastructure. And also, I feel it limits losses. The bottom picture, oh, I'm supposed to move this thing around, am I? The bottom picture is actually from Brazil, and the other picture is I stole from Port Crisp, and I'm not exactly sure where it's from. Anyway, but in the global marketplace, if you want to go into the global marketplace, you need both quantity and quality again, but the quantity becomes a major issue. And you need to move large quantities of product. You need to be able to move in shipping containers, in 40-foot shipping containers, unless you have a very high quality, very high price product, which you can then air ship. But air shipping is extremely expensive. This is a slide by Linus Opana from Stellenbosch, just giving you some idea of integration of what is quality. And as you can see, quality has a whole number of components to it. First, there's a sensory one, which we look at, what we see, what we touch, what we smell. Second is the safety issue, which is mainly associated with microbial, but in some countries, pesticides and other chemical contaminants are a problem. There's one other one which is nutritional, and the other one are emotional. Do people like what they're eating? What is the origin? Is it organic? I'm not a great fan of organic, but is it organic? Can we in fact trace it back to the farm? And do we need to label it in some way or other to indicate something? We know about grades, and something's missing off my slide, but we won't worry about that. Oh, here it appears instantaneously. I never know how I did that. But anyway, so grades can be external and internal. Human and instrumental components are also involved. So what is the human conditions in making these grades? I am not a great fan about national grades. And the reason is that they're useful in selling product, but you have to have a level of trust between the person selling and the person buying, because you may not see them. You may be dealing over the internet, or you may be dealing by telephone. So as long as you're fixed in both sides, in the receiver and the seller side, as to what you're expecting of the individual, you can set up your own grade standard, but grade standards are based on these normal characteristics. Again, they relate to what is quality. Now, what is happening in the marketplace? I mentioned supermarkets are becoming more and more important. And there's now a stricter requirement both for quality and for volume or quantity. There's this greater focus on safety, particularly in developing countries, but I think also you'll see the same thing in Thailand. We're also looking at removal of seasonality. In other words, where we only got a crop one time of the year, we're now sourcing internationally or globally to get supplies all year round. Yes, price will vary, but in fact we can get most products from different parts of the world at different times of the year. It then becomes a problem of logistics. How do we move these products? How do we in fact track these products? And logistics has become an increasingly important aspect for handling fruits and vegetables. Price in this is one component. It's not the only component. Price is important to everyone, but it's not the major component. Can I get the product when I need it, often at the quality I want, when I want it, becomes more important. And now I come to an issue which is near and dear to my heart, and one that even though we do all this research, we still have problems of mechanical injury. And mechanical injury is the single biggest loss in most cases. It occurs at harvest, it occurs during handling, before packing, and it occurs subsequently after harvest. It's something we can do something about, but it's continuously present in the system, and it seems to be very difficult for us to reduce that loss, to reduce that mechanical injury, to make sure that in fact we aren't supplying unsightly commodities, we're not favouring water loss by breaking that cuticle, and we're not allowing disease entry again by breaking the cuticle. And you'll see here papayas at the bottom and an eggplant, which have obviously been seriously mechanically injured. It occurs during transportation. These are peppers, and they're going to be moved from the field to the market. They're reasonably well packed at the top, except that the packs are overpacked. And now if you put another one on top, you're going to start squashing it down. Of course, there are other examples of people sitting on top of the load in various places, and the bottom lower one is actually Vietnam, where they've got a large number of vegetables. You still could see, I suppose, in Thailand that. The one on the top is from Kenya, and you can see Uganda, and you can see that there are bananas in that load somewhere at the bottom of the people sitting on top. The other one is from Colombia, and it's going out of the main market, even though that's a reasonably well-developed area. I'm not too sure about how the tomatoes feel at the bottom of this load. You can think about having another metre or so of tomatoes on top of you, and you're reasonably right. What will be the loss in this load? Have a guess. It's probably going to be running 10 to 20%. Now, you may sell some of it, but you're not going to sell all of it. The types of injury we all know: impact, compression, vibration, cuts and scratches. One of the things we commonly see in say, peaches and things like that in the US are fingernails, especially your thumb. And you'll see these marks, which clearly are a beautiful indentation of some woman's, could be a man. Some men have very long fingernails too, and so it's a problem. But again, it happens at various stages. In the case of papaya, we have a unique situation relative to other fruit, and it's that if you take a papaya and you drop it from about a metre onto this table, which is probably reasonably smooth, catch it, let it ripen, and you will not be able to find out where that drop took place. On the other hand, if this table has some very fine sandpaper on it, and you drop it from about 2 or 3 centimetres, you will get this appearance here. You'll get what we refer to as green islands, or a failure to degreen at the point of an abrasion impact. And you see this when fruit hits the side of bins in a packing shed. On the other hand, when the fruit gets around 30% or more colour on it, it becomes a major source of impact injury. And it doesn't take very much to cause this disruption. What you're seeing is the energy of that fruit falling onto the surface being dissipated in this area here. Let's see if I can get this done. So this area is the energy blows up the cells close to that point of impact. But you'll also notice at the top of the opposite side, you'll also see some damage. And what happens is that the fruit keeps coming down. When it hits the surface, the top of the fruit comes down a little bit as well, because the fruit is soft. And so you then get some damage at the top of the fruit as well. But again, you have abrasion injury, very common, and when it's got green colour on, an impact injury becomes very pronounced after about 25–30%. We normally have to harvest at the 25% stage. And the reason is that fruit flies don't lay eggs, normally until the fruit has around 25% colour on it. And so we have to harvest before that, so you won't have fruit flies in the fruit itself. And if you look at, if we go through our post-harvest chain, you can see where injury takes place. This is mechanical injury. At harvest, you get some associated frequently with dirt in the bins or something in the buckets that are being used. Before culling is normally associated with the large field bins we use, which were made out of plywood and will have a rough surface. After culling, before packing, and after packing. But I want to show you that this is a dramatic loss, a cumulative loss of fruit from mechanical injury. Nothing else, mechanical injury. Here we are, fruit that we spent money growing and producing, and then we're throwing it away by causing injury to the fruit and making it unsightly and dropping its grade. And so this to me is an area where we can do work. It's not an area that we can do a lot of research necessarily, because we do know what the problem is here, but getting people to be careful in the way they handle product is another matter. Plug in or find another power source. Sometimes my wife tells me I need to plug. I just had a discussion about Facebook. I don't use Facebook, so I can say what I like about Facebook. Oh, did I do that? I'm sorry. It's right, it's gone. So I'm not into Facebook. Don't send me any text messages. I'm not into text messaging. So we know we can reduce significantly mechanical injury by taking care at all steps, reducing rough surfaces. And plywood is a very rough surface, and treat fruit very gently. And our aim is, of course, to get a high quality product which we can market and therefore get the highest price. The other one, which Mike mentioned yesterday, is this issue of temperature maintenance, and it's a crucial component, bearing in mind that our tropical commodities have distinct problems of chilling injury, and therefore the temperature we can use are in fact reduced. We know what the problems are with chilling injury. We know that there's differences in relationship between, in this case, storage temperature and storage life. Carambola peaks out at around about 5 degrees, but papaya and banana are above 10 degrees. So we need to make appropriate storage recommendations. But what is an appropriate storage recommendation? What sort of research do we do to determine what the appropriate storage recommendation is? Our products, if we want to move to developed markets, we have at least about 2 weeks from harvest to getting to the major consuming sites. Be it Japan, be it mainland US, we have this problem of this time. We need to maintain temperature during that time. Hawaii is a bit unusual in this circumstance. Because we have a lot of tourists coming into Hawaii, the planes going out from Hawaii don't have very much load on them, cargo load. And so our cargo rates on aircraft is actually quite low compared to what it would be from Thailand, where agricultural products would be competing with manufactured products. But how do we optimize storage conditions and make recommendations? If you go and look in recommendations for shipping product, you will find these sort of variation. You will find banana recommendations from 13 to 15 degrees centigrade and 1 to 4 weeks. If you look down here at papaya, 7 to 13 degrees and 1 to 3 weeks. Don't worry too much about relative humidity. Relative humidity is a difficult thing to control post-harvest. There are mechanisms for doing it, but it's much more difficult than temperature control. How useful is this to you? If I say papaya can be shipped between 7 and 13 degrees, and they could be 1 to 3 weeks, does that really help you? It's a vague sort of definition of what you should do. And I'll tell you what's seemingly happened. If you look at different sources of information on storage recommendations, I'm giving you 2 for papaya and pineapple. Let's concentrate on papaya. Don't get me on pineapple. So you'll see this recommendation in source 1, 7 to 13 degrees, 1 to 3 weeks. Then you'll see 12.8 degrees for 3 weeks. Why do you ask, is it 12.8? It's 12.8 because someone converted it from Fahrenheit, and that's why they got 12.8. It's got nothing to do with reality. The only 2 countries in the world using Fahrenheit are the United States and Liberia in Africa. So I'm not exactly sure what that tells you about either Liberia or the United States. But why is there this difference? Why are we seeing different sources giving different recommendations? The reason is that in commercial handling, you will see most shippers using a storage temperature of around 7 to 8 degrees centigrade. Though that other recommendation was nearly 13 degrees centigrade, commercially what they will do is ship it around 7 to 8. And the reason is that at 7 to 8 degrees centigrade, you can hold it for about 3 weeks, not get chilling injury, and get no ripening, and then have another 5 to 7 days to market. On the other hand, if you in fact store at about 12 to 13 degrees centigrade, you will get slow ripening, and then you will get a shorter period at ambient temperatures. So the question really is to you is that different people have used different criteria. And laboratory studies are good in and of themselves, but as we all know, in laboratory studies, we pick the best fruit and we handle it very gently. That is quite different from what happens in commercial operations. So you really need to do simulated shippings. You also then need to look at commercial experience in the application. But it's the use of different criteria which has led to people using different recommendations. But we need to integrate all the data. We can't just take laboratory studies as being the only way of doing it. Modified atmospheres, and I'm going to actually repeat what Adel Khader has said. It has distinct advantages: retards senescence, reduces ethylene sensitivity, reduces some physiological disorder, reduces pathogens, and it has some effect on insect control. This is an experiment from Frank Scott from many years ago, where you have bananas harvested on the same day, one wrapped up with an ethylene absorbent in very thick plastic, showing no ripening, whereas the ones which were just left out have ripened completely. We do know that modified atmosphere works on some of our tropical crops: avocado, banana, cherimoya, lychee, and mango. In the case of lychee, most of it has to do with water loss, but it still does function. There are other ones where you could probably regard modified atmosphere as having a fair effect. And the question then is it worthwhile going to that extra trouble and expense for that small improvement? And that's something you need to go and look at. The most important thing is the one that Adel Khader frequently made at all these presentations, is that modified atmosphere is not a replacement for temperature control. Temperature management is the number one thing. Modified atmosphere is added on top of that. Right, so let's go on to safety. And in safety, it's become increasingly important. It's increasing of consumer concern. Consumers may say they're concerned with genetic engineered food, but in fact, the biggest problem and the biggest risk in the US market, at least, and to some extent in Europe, is microbial contamination. Some of the fears associated with it, of course, are associated with misinformation. And let's first deal with this issue of pesticides. Now, pesticides are a major concern. In the US, it's much less of a concern than I would have in, let's say, India, Thailand, Southeast Asia in general. Pesticide use is very strictly controlled in the US. Access to a number of pesticides requires a license in order to buy it and apply it. So the example, of course, is eggplant. We do know that eggplant receives a lot of pesticide application. But there is an alternative to this, but there's a lot of resistance to it. And so that's up to you. We can talk about that later. Pesticide application generally is a major problem, not for the consumer. As long as the pesticide being used is approved for that product, it's generally not a problem for the consumer. The person who really suffers from pesticide application is this guy here, the applicator. In the US, you probably wouldn't be allowed to do this. It would be prohibited for him to actually do this sort of spraying in a closed environment in this way. He has a respirator on, which is good. He's not really suited with a suit which would give him complete safety in this sort of an application. This, of course, is also a major. This is from Honduras. This is a slide provided by Andrew Medlicott. And you can see them washing out spray cylinders in the local creek. Of course, the creek goes further down and people are using that for washing. And so it is a major. And the other one, of course, is, this is a endosulfan, which when I was involved in cotton research, was used for insect control. And it's labeled insecticide for cotton, but it's being used in this case on a vegetable crop. So it's not the best. There's a whole series of pathogens which can be associated with fruits and vegetables. And I'm not going to go through the list. Oh, if any of you want a copy of my presentation, I'm not sure how I could do it, but I'll gladly give it to you as a PDF, and I can do that from however the organisers want to do it. So if we look at microorganisms that cause food losses, they normally affect aroma, they normally affect texture, so if you have a rot in a fruit, it affects the texture. And it affects the appearance of the food in some way or other. However, a foodborne illness, you can't see it. You can't, in fact, see any change in the fruit appearance or not. And therefore, you get this feeling that that may be safe because you can't see anything. In many cases, you have to go and do laboratory study to confirm the presence of some sort of human pathogen in that, or in or on that food. And they take time. Many of the assays for human pathogens will take upwards of a week to get a result back. In that time, the food could have been eaten. And so you don't really know. And this is why the biggest fear associated with food pathogens are. The way we address pathogens in post-harvest handling of fresh fruits and vegetables is to have layers of protection. In other words, we do certain steps, and if we do them correctly, we add additional barriers to ensure that there aren't pathogens on the product when it reaches the consumer. And so it's referred to as layers of protection. You want to make sure each one of these layers is carried out so that the product reaches the market is as safe as you can assure it is for the consumer. I can't give you no risk, but I can give you a practice of saying, we have done this, we have done this, we have done this, we have done this, and we know all of these steps improve our possibilities. So how do we, in fact, if we ignore firstly at this stage what we've done in the field, and look now at what we're doing from harvest. So we harvest and accumulate the fruit. What steps are involved in there? Do we make sure that we don't have dirty buckets, dirty bins, or anything like that? Do we make sure that we carefully handle it? Do we make sure that we have people handling the fruit who don't have disease, who wash their hands after coming out of toilets? I want to admit that women are better at washing their hands coming out of toilets than men are. All the observations have shown that, particularly in restaurants. What is the water supply we've used for washing? Is that water supply safe? And the last one would be cold chain management. Is the cold chain maintained? Is in fact the facilities clean and suitable and sanitized at regular intervals? And then the last two are timely post-harvest treatments, quickly cooling it, making sure that disease control is maintained, modified atmosphere in some cases. Coatings also give you some protection. And the last one is cross-contamination, which is frequently a big problem. On that cross-contamination, let me make a point that the use of chlorine in water after harvest is not designed to sanitize the product. The contact time is frequently not long enough. The object of having chlorine 100 parts per million and maintain the pH around 7 is to avoid cross-contamination. In other words, if you do get a contaminant in the water, it doesn't contaminate the other fruit, which you don't have any contaminants on down the road. Anyway, the use of manure is a problem. You need to make sure it's composted correctly. We've had outbreaks in the US associated with pigs or with cow feces being blown into the field. So you need to exclude animals from the field. What is the water quality? And this is a big problem. Not only for you, but even in Hawaii, we have problems in finding water which is potable. In other words, you can drink drinking water to wash the product before we market. Some of our farms don't have access to city water, don't have access to clean water, and therefore you need to find ways that they can in fact wash their product with water which is reasonably safe. And so that's that reference there at the end to solar pasteurization. There are systems which you can use which are sort of like solar water heaters, slightly different, which will give you almost portable water. And they can be used in areas which have little or no good water. Of course, worker and field sanitation is a big issue. We require portable toilets in fields. And it's a problem. Again, I've talked about post-harvest handling, cooling and packaging, transportation. And of course, these are the things that are not recommended. In this case, I'm not going to tell you which country it is, it's not Thailand, but they're washing leafy vegetables in water which has this brownish hue to it. And it's constantly being reused, and manure is used as a source of fertilizer. And I put the one on the bottom not to indicate that it's a major problem, but you can see that the wrapping of this bamboo basket is a former urea fertilizer bag. Right? Not really something I'd recommend. It's probably not washed at all either. And you'll notice that the lady is sort of pushing the load down. So she has this leafy vegetable, in this case it's lettuce, and she's sort of squashing it into the bag. So it comes back to not only do we have a health problem, but we have a severe mechanical injury problem. And this thing was stacked right to the top, as you frequently see them, with a nice big lid on. The one on the side here is showing chickens being sold for consumption alongside of the vegetables, which we normally try to keep them separated because of salmonella contamination, which is an issue. And I'm nearly to the end. Anyway, so let me summarize what I've talked about, and hopefully we'll have some time for questions. So consumers are demanding quality. They're demanding safety now in the US. Though their demands for safety are obviously, sometimes we don't want pesticides, even though microbial contamination is the bigger problem. And so they have some misunderstanding of the type of safety they need. And they want availability. And of course, consistency in all of these is crucial. Now, we need to look at increased technology. And Dr. Reed spoke about it yesterday in some length. But this needs to be integrated into the system. It's very difficult to put new technology into the system unless you make sure it can be integrated, that doesn't add excessively to cost, and that cost can be recovered. And so that's important. We're now a lot into the US, into tracking and loss minimization. And some of you have seen in supermarkets where they scan the product that you're buying. Well, that scan tells them how much you purchased, what the product was. They know how much came into the supermarket. They can then tell you how much they lost in the supermarket. So supermarkets now are getting much more able to tell you what their actual losses are in the individual supermarket. So the last part, growing for quality. Maturity and harvest, which I haven't spoken about, but is crucial. Careful handling, proper management, and sanitation. And does the product meet consumer requirements? And are they satisfied? Will they come back again and buy that product, or will they buy your product? So I need to finish up here. This is what you can do with mechanical injury to papaya. You can make labels out of it. You can actually buy a laser, a green laser, which will in fact enable you to put all sorts of things, write all things on fruit as well. And I want to acknowledge a number of people who I've worked with over the years. Dwayne Bartholomew, I've done a lot of work with pineapple with Dwayne. Richard Mansard, I've worked with him on papaya. Ray Ming, mainly into genomics now, but I'm still working, doing a lot with him. Paul Moore, who's another plant physiologist. Ted Radovich is into sustainable ag, and we're looking at organic handling and post-harvest handling practices. Qingyi Yu is another molecular biologist. Marissa Wall is with USDA, and I've worked with her on a number of crops and post-harvest handling. Francis Z, I worked with for many years. He's a curator at the Germplasm Depository. And in the lab, I have to mention my wife, Nancy Chen, and then in the laboratory, Helen Tarano, Gail Ru'u, Qingman Wai, and Bingfang Wu. And so, are there any questions at this point? Mr. Chen.
Thanks, Dr. Paul, for your presentation. I would like to share some idea with you. You have told many challenges for small farmer and medium size, right?
Yeah.
They can have many good quality for fruit and vegetable, and then how we can deal with modern trade.
With?
Modern trade, like Lotus or Tesco Lotus or the big department store.
Oh, the only way you could do that is to either have cooperatives or buyers who will buy your product and accumulate. Supermarkets will not take a small truck coming up. They don't want you delivering to their main warehouses in a small truck. They need to have enough product to supply all of their stores in general. Sometimes they do have differentiation between stores, but normally in the US, they want enough product to deliver to all their stores. And they frequently don't want enough just for 1 week. And so supermarkets are very difficult to deal with unless you can provide for a number of weeks a fair amount of product which can be distributed throughout their stores. We have problems if, I have not presented it here, but the losses in the supermarket itself, for papaya, is around 60%. And you say, well, that's an incredible amount of loss. The problem in this particular case is the supermarket chain requires every store to carry papaya. But in some areas, let's say Los Angeles, the consumers don't buy papaya, but the store has to carry it, which means they may buy 1 box a week, and they may throw 9 of the 10 fruit away. And that's why the losses are very high. But the problem for you is that the sort of market you're after? Do you really want to accomplish going into the supermarket with products which people are not familiar with? Are you better off dealing with smaller, let's say, ethnic markets who are familiar with your product, and then try to get people outside of that group to start looking at your product? Long Kong would be an example. You know, not many people are going to know about that in the US. And that's the problem with papaya. On the West Coast and the East Coast, there's some familiarity. In the Midwest, they look at a papaya, well, that's a coconut. And you laugh. but I was at a demonstration of genetically engineered papaya in Long Beach, which is in Los Angeles. And a little boy came up to our stand, and his mother said, "What is that?" And he said, "Coconut." And so it's an understanding of the population of what that product is. Even coconut people are not too sure what to do in developed markets. People who've had experience may have had some understanding. And so I question whether you really need, in some of your cases, to be looking at the supermarket chains, but looking at smaller market chains which actually cater for the consumer who is familiar with it, and build up your understanding and experience in those all communities. Now, fruits and vegetables, the vegetables, particularly Asian vegetables, we don't see many of those in our major supermarkets. If you wanted those, you would have to go down to the Chinese, Vietnamese markets. And that's where you'll see a whole range of different Asian vegetables. You won't see them in Safeway. Or if you do, you may see them in Whole Foods, but then you'll pay twice as much. So, you need to look at where you're going to market it to and how you're going to market it.
Power from Department of Food Science and Technology. Yeah, I'm the food safety. Yeah,
oh.
So I'd like to ask the question about the food safety. According to your presentation, you said that during washing with water, chlorinated water, the reason is to avoid the cross contamination, right? But in the food plant, when they do, especially for the fish cut, the leafy vegetables. They use exactly the sanitizer to reduce the microorganism, right? Yeah. My question is, they have the tendency to use less and less choline compound. And how about in the US?
Well, I'm not familiar with. We have some processing, minimal processing. And yes, they use chlorine, but the contact time, again, is not that long. The contact time is less than 2 or 3 minutes in general. But at the chlorine level, you're looking at 100, 150 parts per million. You need a contact time of probably around 10 to 15 minutes to ensure sanitation. So again, it's a cross-contamination issue. Now, in the US, chlorine doesn't have a problem. In Europe, there is some questions raised about the chloramides, I suppose, produced in the water and in the product. However, there is at this time no alternative to chlorine. And chlorine has been used in water for many, many years. The organic people are the ones who I find most interesting in the use of chlorine. The way the organic standard is written in the US has always amused me. What it says is that the outflow from the wash tank, not the inflow, has to be below potable water, which is 10 parts per million. So you could have 150 parts per million at one point, as long as the outflow is less than 10. Right? And so that's what they do. And so chlorine, I don't know of any other sanitizer. There have been some ozone studies and things like that, and it has potential, but chlorine is easy to use. One of the problems we do have that people may not be aware of is that you're not allowed to go down to the supermarket and buy chlorine. You're supposed to buy labeled product, which costs about 2 or 3 times more than if you buy it from the supermarket. So if an inspector comes, he really is supposed to have a drum which says approved for uses in sanitation. It's a quirk of the system. Most of our people go and buy it.
Thank you.
Did I unplug it again?
Thank you very much, Professor.